Welcome to the FedRAMP online training series. I'm Jason Oxenhandler, your instructor for this training. In this course, we will discuss and provide an overview of the Security Assessment Report, or the SAR. The FedRAMP PMO developed this training series to help FedRAMP CSP applicants properly prepare for a FedRAMP assessment by providing a deeper understanding of the program and the level of effort required to complete a FedRAMP assessment. This training module is tailored to a CSP going through the JAB path and using a third-party assessment organization, or a 3PAO, to assess their cloud system. By providing insight into what to expect when going through the FedRAMP assessment process, we want to ensure CSPs have the knowledge and the resources to achieve FedRAMP authorization. At the conclusion of this training session, you should understand the relationship between the SAR and the FedRAMP Security Assessment Framework, the writing standards for each section of the SAR, the considerations for the CSP to develop the Plan of Action and Milestones, known as POAMs, the key inputs and outputs and the basis for an authorization decision, and the aspects of the SAR the FedRAMP PMO looks for when conducting a review. Federal agencies are required to assess and authorize information systems in accordance with FISMA. The FedRAMP Security Assessment Framework, or SAF, is compliant with FISMA and is based on the NIST RMF, the Risk Management Framework. In fact, FedRAMP uses the same documents and deliverables that NIST requires agencies to use. However, FedRAMP simplifies the NIST RMF process by creating 4 process areas that encompass the 6 within 837. Document, assess, authorize, and monitor. CSPs verify compliance by following the FedRAMP SAF. Through this process, the risks of a CSP's services are determined, and it gives agency authorizing officials the ability to determine if the risk posture of a cloud system meets the risk posture needed to host government data. The Security Assessment Framework ensures that managing risk from the operation and use of federal systems is consistent with the organization's mission, business objectives, and overall risk strategy, and supports consistent, well-informed, and ongoing security authorization decisions to achieve more secure information and systems. In this training module, we will focus on the authorize phase of the SAF, which includes the SAR and Plan of Action and Milestones, the POAM templates, as the key documents that determine if the system's residual risk is acceptable. The FedRAMP program requires cloud service providers, CSPs, to use an independent 3PAO. For the JAB path and the CSP supplied path, FedRAMP requires the assessor to be a FedRAMP accredited 3PAO to perform the security assessment and develop the SAR. Now, for agency authorizations, an agency may use a FedRAMP 3PAO or an agency internal independent assessment organization. At the completion of the assessment testing, the independent assessors or the 3PAO produce the SAR, and it documents the verification of the CSP's implementation of security controls and provides the overall risk posture. The SAR records all current vulnerabilities and risks to the system and contains details of the testing methodology and the results. Additionally, the SAR provides guidance to CSPs in mitigating the security weaknesses found. The assessment must be conducted in compliance with NIST SP 853 Revision 4. The plan for testing was documented in a Security Assessment Plan, or a SAP. However, quite frequently, the testing and assessment deviate from the approved SAP. All deviations from the approved SAP are detailed in the list of assessment deviations. Examples include a change in inventory from the time of planning to testing, or a change in schedule from plan to actual. FedRAMP provides a security assessment report template, and all 3 PAOs are required to use this template to report their findings. The SAR template is available on fedramp.gov. For JAB provisional ATOs, the 3 PAO is expected to provide a high-level briefing to the JAB TRs. This briefing will highlight findings, mitigations, and operational requirements, as well as identify any problems or areas of concern. The FedRAMP ISSO coordinates with the CSP and 3 PAO on the briefing. The SAR is divided into 8 sections and includes 9 appendices. The next few sections will detail each of these sections further and give specific instructions on how to write them and what FedRAMP is looking for when reviewing these documents. Let's talk about the SAR template. Section 1 and 2 are pretty straightforward and detail the scope of testing and system purpose, including the security categorization determined in accordance with FIPS 199. Beginning with Section 3, the 3 PAO documents the methodology used to conduct the security assessment. It should be reflective of the agreed-upon security assessment plan and customized to correct identified weaknesses while validating those corrections. A list of deviations from the original plan for the assessment presented in the SAP should be appropriately documented. Additionally, the 3 PAO must also identify all vulnerabilities and threats and provide a risk analysis. A vulnerability is an inherent weakness in an information system that can be exploited by a threat or threat agent, resulting in an undesirable impact on the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the data or system. A vulnerability may be due to a design flaw or an error in configuration, which makes the network or a host on the network susceptible to malicious attacks from local or remote users. Vulnerabilities can exist in multiple areas of the system or facilities, such as in firewalls, application servers, web servers, OSs, or fire suppression systems. Now, a threat is an adversarial force or phenomenon that could impact the availability, integrity, or confidentiality of an information system and its networks, including the facility that houses the hardware and software. A threat agent is an element that provides the delivery mechanism for a threat. An entity that initiates the launch of a threat agent is referred to as a threat actor. A threat actor might purposefully launch a threat agent. However, a threat actor could also be a trusted employee that acts as an agent by making an unintentional human error. FedRAMP takes threat types into consideration to help determine the likelihood that a vulnerability could be exploited. The 3 PAO is responsible for assigning threat types to vulnerabilities, then determining the likelihood that a vulnerability could be exploited by the corresponding threat. Identifying vulnerabilities and threats are key in determining the risk exposure of a cloud system. The goal of determining risk exposure is to facilitate decision-making on how to respond to real and perceived threats. The Security Assessment Results section describes all security weaknesses found during testing. The following elements for each security weakness are reported in the Risk Exposure Summary worksheet. The identifier. All weaknesses are assigned a unique ID in the form of a V-number - security control ID. For example, the first vulnerability listed would be reported as V1-AC2 Enhancement 2 if the vulnerability is for Control ID AC2 Enhancement 2. If there are multiple vulnerabilities for the same security control ID, the first part of the vulnerability ID must be incremented. For example, V1-AC2 Enhancement 2, then V2 AC2 Enhancement 2. Next is the name. a short descriptive title or name of the vulnerability. After that, source of discovery. The source of discovery refers to the method that was used to discover the vulnerability. It could be a web application scanner, manual testing, security test procedure workbook, an interview, or a document review. In practice, the reference to the source of discovery is generally a reference to the scan or rescan and includes the date, the test procedure workbook, or pen test report and the date of that. Next is the description. That's a full description of the weakness that must be detailed along with the specific potential impact to the system. Next is the affected IP address or host names or database. For each reported vulnerability, all affected IP addresses, host names, and databases must be included. If there are multiple hosts or databases that have the same vulnerability, list all affected hosts and databases. Now, let's talk about applicable threats. The applicable threats describe the unique threats that have the ability to exploit the security vulnerability. Threat IDs are derived from the list of threats in Table 3-3 of the SAR template. Likelihood, impact, and risk exposure. Now, these categories are noted both before and after mitigating controls and factors have been identified and considered and are rated on a scale of high, moderate, or low. Risk statement. Provide a risk statement that describes the risk to the business. Also indicate whether the affected machines are internally or externally facing. Let's talk about mitigating controls and factors for a second. Describe any applicable mitigating controls or factors that could downgrade the likelihood or risk exposure. Also, indicate whether the affected machines are internally or externally facing. Include a full description of any mitigating factors or compensating controls if the risk is an operational requirement. The recommendation. Now, this describes how the vulnerability must be resolved. Indicate if there are multiple ways that the vulnerability could be resolved or a recommendation for acceptance of an operational requirement. Lastly, the justification or proposed remediation. All you have to do here is provide a rationale for recommendation of risk adjustment or operational requirement. On to sections 5 and 6. These deal with identifying specific risks that have either been corrected, mitigated, accepted, or are considered part of an interconnected system. Now, in some cases, the initial risk exposure to the system is adjusted due to either corrections that occurred during testing or due to other mitigating factors. The 3PAO is responsible for documenting the following. Risks corrected during testing. These risks are discovered during the testing and have been corrected prior to the completion of testing. They should be verified, and the verification statements need to contain the following information. A detailed description of how the verification of closure was completed. Now, if it was a finding from a scan or a rescan of the component completed, some scan finding validations are completed via manual methods, as well as if a manual test was conducted or a document reviewed. Now, if it was a finding from a manual test must be used to verify, such as a document examination. Now, risks with mitigating factors. Risks that have had their severity levels changed due to mitigating factors. The factors used to justify the changing initial risk exposure rating should also be noted, and the description of mitigating factors for each item should contain the following. A detailed description of the specific risk to the system based on the general description of the vulnerability provided, and a detailed description of the mitigating factors and compensating controls that support the adjustment of risk. Risks remaining due to operational requirements. These are risks that reside in the system and cannot be corrected due to operational constraints. An explanation of the operational constraints and risks are also included in the appropriate security assessment test cases and in the SSP. Now, this applies to all findings in the SAR. All items in the risk summary table are documented in the test cases workbook and are based on a unique ID. Because these risks will not be corrected, they are not tracked in the Plan of Action and Milestones, or the POAMs. The description of operational requirements, rationale, and mitigating factors should contain a detailed description of the specific risk to the system based on the general description of the vulnerability provided, and a detailed description of the mitigating factors and compensating controls that mitigate the ongoing risks to the system. Now, risks for interconnected systems. 3PAOs must include any known risks with interconnected systems that were discovered. CSPs shall disclose any known risks with the interconnected systems. In order to determine this information, though, it may be necessary to consult other security assessment reports, or SARs, interconnection agreements, service level agreements, memorandums of understanding, U.S. CERT advisories, and reference table 11-1 in the SSP, which lists interconnected systems as the authoritative source. Inherent relationships between the system and other interconnected systems may impact the overall system security posture. However, though, in some cases the system may not have any external interconnections, in which case the 3PAO should note the rationale as to why this section is not applicable. Let's talk about the appendices. The appendices give you the opportunity to provide any supporting information that further tells the story of how the 3PAO tested the cloud system. Supporting appendices provide detailed assessment-related information, including general references, definitions, terms, and acronyms. Now, even though this section is pre-populated with information already contained in the SAR, the 3PAO is expected to add more information that is unique to the cloud system being tested. In addition, a list of all documents reviewed is required. The Security Test Procedure Workbooks. Provide the Security Test Procedure Workbooks. It's that simple. Ensure that results of all tests are recorded in the workbooks. Infrastructure Scan Result. All items in inventories must be scanned, unless sampling is permitted per the approved SAP. The scans should be referenced by title and detailed file name, including extension, and must not be embedded in the documents. They can be zip files by type of scan, for example, operating system, web, etc. However, they must be provided in a parsable format, such as .xml or .csv. Sample files should be provided to the PMO or agency prior to submission to verify readability. Database scan results. Provide all database scan results generated by the scanner in a readable format. Bundle all the scan results into one zip file. Do not insert files that require a scan license to read the file. Web app scan results. Indicate the web applications that were scanned and indicate the function that the web-facing application plays for the system. There's also an appendix for assessment results. This is a summary of system security risks from FedRAMP testing and a final summary of overall system security risks. Let's talk about some other appendices. There's an appendices for automated and manual tools used. Unauthenticated scans also has its own appendices. This is where we want you to provide results from any unauthenticated scans. However, in order to use this table, the independent assessor or 3PAO must obtain approval from the authorizing official when submitting the SAP. If this table is not used, write not applicable. There are other appendices that we can talk about, one for manual test results, one for auxiliary documents, and one for penetration test results. Now, these are provided in the pen test report, and results are included in the risk summary table. For inventory, database, web application, and other automated and manual tools and unauthenticated scan results, the 3PAO should provide a complete inventory, all fully authenticated scan results, and identify any false positives that were generated by the scanner. Now, as part of security testing, automated scans are required. On larger implementations, a subset of all representative hosts and device types must be scanned using full authentication. The advantage of running scans as fully authenticated privileged users is that the scanner can access the registry, file attributes, installed packages, and patch levels. Account credentials for the authenticated scans must use login IDs and user roles that offer the greatest possible privileges for the scan system, for example, a root administrator. Now, the use of non-authenticated scans or unauthenticated scans can assist in vulnerability severity determinations and to prioritize remediation efforts, since unauthenticated scan vulnerabilities are seen from the point of an attacker or intruder. Non-authenticated scans can augment fully authenticated scans if the information helps to determine the risk exposure. Now, FedRAMP does not require unauthenticated scans. 3PAOs do not need to run source code scans. However, that said, if a CSP develops and uses original source code in their service offering, the CSP is required to perform source code scanning on the installed release and provide the source code analysis report to the 3PAO to satisfy Control SA11 Enhancement 1. The 3PAO submits all scan results to the FedRAMP ISSO at the same time the SAR is provided, and the 3PAO must be prepared to brief the results to the FedRAMP PMO and the JAB TR representatives. The Federal Information Management Act, or FISMA, requires that a plan of action and milestones, or POAMs, be developed and used as the primary mechanism for tracking all system security weaknesses and issues. The POAM is a mitigation plan designed to address specific residual security weaknesses and includes information on costs, resources, and target dates. The purpose of the POAM is to facilitate a disciplined and structured approach to mitigating risks in accordance with the CSP's priorities. POAMs include the findings and recommendations of the Security Assessment Report and the continual security assessments. FedRAMP uses the POAM to monitor progress in correcting weaknesses or deficiencies noted during the security control assessment and throughout the continuous monitoring process. After receiving the SAR from the 3PAO, the CSP develops a POAM that addresses the specific vulnerabilities that are documented in the SAR. The CSP needs to demonstrate that it has a plan in place for correcting each security weakness that was identified. The POAM serves as a tracking system for the CSP and represents the CSP's, quote, to-do list. FedRAMP provides a POAM template for CSPs, which is available on the FedRAMP website. All high, moderate, and low findings from the SAR must be mapped into the POAM. High-impact vulnerabilities must be mitigated within 30 days. Moderate impact vulnerabilities must be mitigated within 90 days. The CSP determines a date for closure of low items. However, low items must have a completion date and be remediated. A large number of open low items may be considered a risk to the security posture of the system. The POAMs are based on the following: security categorization of the cloud information system, specific weaknesses or deficiencies in deployed security controls, importance of the identified security control weaknesses or deficiencies, the scope of the weakness in systems within the environment, proposed risk mitigation approach to address the identified weaknesses or deficiency in the security controls. For example, prioritization of risk mitigation actions or allocation of risk mitigation sources. Now, the poem identifies, number one, the tasks the CSP plans to accomplish with a recommendation for completion either before or after information system implementation. Number two, it identifies any milestones the CSP has set in place for meeting the tasks. And number three, the scheduled completion dates the CSP has set for the milestones. Documenting the results of security control testing creates a record of the security posture for the system at any given moment in time. The record can be reviewed for risk-based decision-making and to create a POAM to mitigate risks. Within the SAR, the 3PAO must render a professional opinion of their analysis of the risks for the cloud system based on the results from the security assessment. Any recommendations must be supported by findings, evidence, and artifacts. This recommendation will be fully reviewed by the authorizing official. For JAB PATO packages, the 3PAO makes a recommendation for issuance of the PATO. An agency AO might request a recommendation or indication of overall risk, such as high, moderate, or low. Following the development of the SAR and the POAM template, the SAP and SAR and all related documents and attachments related to the security assessment must be submitted by the 3PAO directly to FedRAMP or the agency AO. The CSP is responsible for submitting the SSP and all related documentation and the POAM. Authorizing officials will review the entire security package and make a risk-based decision on whether or not to authorize the system. CSPs that receive either type of authorization will be added to the list of authorized CSPs on FedRAMP.gov. The listing will provide basic information about the service offering related to the authorized system. The authorization letter and the security package will be stored in a secure, access-controlled repository for review by agencies that wish to leverage the CSP's authorization in order to issue their own ATO. Now, once an authorizing official has made a risk-based decision to authorize a CSP environment for use, they formalize this decision in an ATO letter. Authorizing officials provide this letter to the CSP system owner and a copy to the FedRAMP PMO on these letters so that the FedRAMP PMO can verify agency use, keep agencies informed of any changes to a CSP's authorization, and submit their package to FedRAMP for inclusion in the FedRAMP Secure Repository. CSPs that have an agency authorization will have authorization letters granted by a specific government agency, and CSPs that go through the JAB will have a PATO letter signed by the JAB. All security assessment reports are subject to FedRAMP review. When the SAR has been reviewed by the CSP and has been satisfactorily documented by FedRAMP and CSP standards and is ready for submission, the 3PAO will post the document on MAX and notify the ISSO of submission. Once FedRAMP receives the SAR, the document will pass through an initial and detailed review to check the document for quality and content. The initial review will validate the document against FedRAMP standards for completeness and showstoppers. Checks are also made for common problems and critical controls. The majority of the initial review will check for completeness. The FedRAMP PMO is specifically looking to check if all systems and tables of the SAR are populated with relevant information and if that information is complete. Beginning our review at Section 2.2 and 2.3, the FedRAMP PMO checks to verify this information is consistent with the information in the SSP. Typically, this information contains short excerpts cut and pasted from the SSP. Section 3. Are there any modifications to this section? Review any changes to determine that they do not degrade or impact the completeness or integrity of the testing and that they do not deviate from the SAP. The PMO will check for completeness of this section and review all tables to ensure that the tables have not been manipulated and contain the right level of information regarding the assessment. Section 4. There should be no changes to this text, and the bulleted list of elements and the bulleted paragraphs must match. Table 5-1. Ensure scans and artifacts verify remediation of the specific finding. Table 5-2. Ensure that the mitigating factors and compensating controls are sufficient to support the adjustment. If artifacts are referenced, ensure the artifact has been provided or is available for review on site. Table 5-3. Ensure that the mitigating factors and compensating controls are sufficient to mitigate the risks. Table 6-1. Does the table contain any information? If there are no risks, ensure that there is text in the paragraph above the table describing the test methodology used to make the determination. For example, ISAs were reviewed and interfaces were tested. This is especially important for PAASs and SAASs leveraging other systems. Section 7. Review all changes in the first paragraph for correctness and consistency with the executive summary. Review all changes in the last paragraph for a correct recommendation. Now, if this is an initial assessment, the word continuous improvement is not applicable and should be removed. This must meet the intent of the attestation and the recommendation. Table 7-1. Does this table include all items listed in Table 4-1 except operationally required and low-impact items? Are high-impact items listed first in this table? They may be grouped, but all risks, including their unique ID, must be included in order from high to moderate. Typically, the information contains short excerpts cut and paste from the SSP. And finally, Appendix B, the test cases. Verify that the information in the observation and evidence column for each test case contains the following. The appropriate assessment method was used. Actual examine was done for an actual examination. An actual test was performed for an actual test. And an actual interview was conducted. There is enough detail to determine how the test was completed that also includes references to artifacts that are provided or otherwise available for review on site. Names, roles, dates, and topics discussed for interviews is provided. Sufficient details of observations to determine that the test was completed. Sufficient artifacts and evidence are described to support the results of the test. If there is text that indicates the test was not completed or the results do not match the test objective, then column I must indicate other than satisfied, and columns J through N must be completed. For example, a result that indicates no account lockout on Windows systems cannot be identified as satisfied. The FedRAMP PMO will also review the other appendix attachments as well for verification and adequacy. In addition, ensure that the applicable artifacts and other documentation is reviewed. For example, the SSP may be sufficient for some tests, and additionally, specific artifacts are required for other tests. Thanks for joining us for this training session. I'm Jason Oxenhendler, and we'll see you next time.